What if I told you that in 1881, in a Colorado mining town consumed by fear and ignorance, a single act of courage would expose the darkest secrets a community tried to hide? That a woman they called a witch held the key to their salvation? That sometimes the very people we're taught to fear are the ones sent to save us? This is the story they buried in shame, a story of superstition and truth, of persecution and redemption. A story that will make you question everything you think you know about justice, healing, and what happens when one man decides that right matters more than being accepted. But I'm warning you, what this black rancher discovers about the town's respected leaders will shake you to your core. The truth he uncovers will make your blood boil. Stay until the very end, because the justice served in the final moments will leave you cheering and crying at the same time. If you're discovering the forgotten heroes of America's past for the first time, welcome to the Black Rancher. These are the stories that history tried to erase, the courage that textbooks ignored, and the moments when ordinary people became extraordinary. Hit that subscribe button now and smash that notification bell, because these powerful stories of justice and redemption need to be heard by everyone. Share this video with someone who believes in standing up for what's right. They'll be inspired by what you're about to witness. Now, let's dive into Chapter 1 of a story that will forever change how you see courage, community, and the price of speaking truth to power. Silverbrook, Colorado. October 1881. The first snow of winter was already dusting the peaks of the Rocky Mountains when Elijah Washington rode into Silverbrook, his breath forming white clouds in the crisp morning air. At 35, he was a man forged by hardship and tempered by purpose, tall and lean with calloused hands that spoke of honest work and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. His journey from Kansas had taken 3 weeks, following rumors of good grazing land and a town that might be ready to accept a black rancher, willing to work twice as hard for half the respect. The deed to 160 acres of mountain meadow was tucked safely in his saddlebags, purchased sight unseen from a desperate widow back east. As he guided his bay gelding down the rutted main street, Elijah took measure of Silverbrook. It was a typical mining boom town. Hastily built wooden structures crowding together like drunks seeking warmth, false front buildings trying to appear more substantial than they were. The Silver Dollar mine had brought prosperity, evident in the new hotel and the fresh paint on the saloon, but beneath the surface, Elijah sensed the same tension that infected most frontier towns: the fear of outsiders, the suspicion of difference. He was tying his horse outside Morrison's general store when he heard the commotion. "Get away from here, you heathen witch!" The voice was sharp with authority, belonging to a man in a black suit and clerical collar who stood on the store's front porch. "We've told you before, your kind isn't welcome in this Christian town." A small crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination, as they watched a young Indigenous woman standing defiantly before the preacher. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long black hair braided with feathers and wearing a combination of traditional buckskin and practical frontier clothing. In her hands, she clutched a small leather pouch and a bundle of dried herbs. "Reverend Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent but speaking English clearly, "Mrs. Henderson's baby has the fever sickness. The herbs I bring will help break it." "I only want to—" "Superstitious nonsense," the Reverend interrupted, his face flushed with righteous anger. "We don't need your heathen potions and devil worship. Dr. Whitman is a God-fearing physician trained in proper medicine." "Your doctor isn't here," the woman replied with growing desperation. "He went to Denver 3 days ago. The baby could die while you—" "Better to trust in the Lord's will than consort with demons," Mitchell declared, stepping down from the porch. "Now get out of here before I have Sheriff Coleman arrest you for disturbing the peace." Elijah watched this exchange with growing unease. He'd seen this kind of prejudice before, the same mixture of fear and hatred that had followed him through Kansas, Nebraska, and now Colorado. But there was something different here, something that made his instincts prickle with warning. The woman, clearly Cherokee or perhaps Arapaho, he guessed, wasn't backing down despite being outnumbered. There was a quiet dignity in her bearing, a knowledge that went beyond book learning, When she spoke of the sick baby, Elijah heard genuine concern, not the calculated manipulation the Reverend was suggesting. "Please," she said, and for the first time her composure cracked slightly. "I'm begging you, let me help. The child—" "Ayana Crowfeather," came a new voice, cold as winter wind. A tall, pale man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. This had to be someone important, the mayor perhaps, or a mine owner. "I thought we'd made it clear that your presence here is unwelcome." The woman, Ayana, lifted her chin defiantly. "My presence, Mr. Blackwood, or my grandmother's teachings, the ones that saved your daughter from the lung sickness 2 winters ago?" A dangerous silence fell over the crowd. Blackwood's face went white, then flushed deep red. "That was different. That was before we understood the spiritual dangers of your practices." "Spiritual dangers," Ayana repeated, her voice heavy with bitter irony. "Is that what you call healing now?" Elijah felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard enough coded language in his life to recognize it when he saw it. This wasn't about medicine or religion. This was about power and control. Someone had decided that Ayana's ability to heal was inconvenient, possibly threatening to their authority. "The Cherokee witch needs to leave town," called out a voice from the crowd. "She's cursed this place long enough." "Brought sickness instead of healing," shouted another. "Devils disguised as medicine." Elijah stepped forward before he could think better of it. The crowd parted slightly, their attention shifting to this new stranger, a black man whose very presence changed the dynamics of the confrontation. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command, "but did I hear correctly that there's a sick baby who needs help?" Reverend Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "This is a private matter, stranger. I suggest you move along." "Seems like a public matter to me," Elijah replied calmly, nodding toward the crowd. "Public enough that everyone's got an opinion." He looked directly at Ayana. "You're a healer?" "I am," she said simply, meeting his gaze without flinching. "My grandmother taught me the old ways, the herbs that grow in these mountains. Willow bark for fever, echinacea for infection, golden seal for—" "Heathen nonsense," Blackwood interrupted. "This woman is a practitioner of witchcraft, a danger to Christian souls." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Where I come from, we call knowledge about healing plants medicine. Been using willow bark for fever since before there were doctors in these parts." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Of course, where I come from, we also believed that helping sick babies was more important than protecting our pride." The crowd stirred uneasily. Several people glanced toward the Henderson house, where smoke rose from the chimney, and desperate parents waited with their fevering child. "Now see here," the Reverend began, but Elijah held up a hand. "I'm Elijah Washington," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just bought land north of here, planning to raise cattle. Now, I don't know much about your local politics, but I know something about being judged by people who don't know me." His gaze swept the crowd, landing on each face in turn. "Seems to me, if there's a baby sick with fever and someone here knows how to help, the Christian thing would be to let them try." "Who are you to tell us what's Christian?" Mitchell demanded. "Someone who's read the same Bible you have, Reverend," Elijah replied quietly. "The one that talks about helping the sick and welcoming strangers, the one that warns against judging by appearances." Ayana was staring at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "The Henderson baby," she said urgently, "has been fevering for 2 days without treatment." "Without proper treatment from a real doctor," Blackwood corrected. "Not some primitive—" "Where is this real doctor?" Elijah asked bluntly. An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, a woman in the crowd spoke up. "Dr. Whitman went to Denver. Won't be back for days, maybe a week." "And the baby can't wait a week," Ayana added desperately. Elijah looked around the circle of hostile faces, seeing fear and prejudice warring with genuine concern for a child's life. He'd faced these same expressions before, though usually he was the one being judged. There was something profoundly wrong here, something deeper than simple bigotry. "Tell you what," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "I'll take responsibility. If Miss Crowfeather wants to help that baby, I'll stand surety for her actions. If her medicine harms the child, you can hold me accountable." "You don't understand," Blackwood said, his voice strained. "This woman is dangerous. She's been accused of witchcraft, of consorting with dark spirits." "Accused by who?" Elijah asked pointedly. The silence that followed was telling. Glances were exchanged, but no one stepped forward to make a direct accusation. "I see," Elijah said quietly. "Accused, but no accusers willing to face her directly." He turned to Ayana. "Miss Crow-Feather, what exactly do you need to help this baby?" "Willow bark tea to break the fever," she said quickly. "Honey to soothe the throat, and elderflower if the breathing is labored." She held up her leather pouch. "I have everything here." "Simple enough remedies," Elijah observed. "Nothing that couldn't come from any grandmother's kitchen garden." He looked back at the crowd. "Anyone here got objections to willow bark tea?" "It's not the herbs," a middle-aged woman called out from the back of the crowd. "It's her. She's cursed. Ever since she came to town, there's been nothing but trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Elijah asked. Another uncomfortable silence. Finally, the same woman spoke up. "The mine. There have been accidents. Cave-ins. Men hurt." "Mining's dangerous work," Elijah pointed out. "Accidents happen." "Not like these," Blackwood said grimly. 3 men dead in the last 6 months, more injured. The Cherokee witch arrives, and suddenly the mountain turns against us. Elijah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. This was starting to make sense, the kind of sense that led to lynch mobs and burning buildings. Her convenient scapegoat for industrial accidents, someone to blame when profits were threatened by costly safety measures. "When did these accidents start?" he asked quietly. "Spring," Blackwood replied. "Right around the time she showed up, claiming her grandmother's spirit told her to come here. And I suppose there couldn't be any other explanation," Elijah said, "like maybe cutting corners on safety to increase profits, or pushing men to work faster than is safe. Or ignoring the warning signs that any experienced miner would recognize." Blackwood's face darkened. "You're talking about things you don't understand, stranger." "I understand plenty," Elijah replied. "I understand that accidents happen when people value money more than lives. I understand that it's easier to blame an outsider than look at your own failures. And I understand that right now, while we're standing here arguing about curses and blame, there's a baby who needs help." He turned to Ayana. "Miss Crow-Feather, if you're willing to trust a stranger, I'd be honored to escort you to the Henderson house. Anyone who wants to object can take it up with me." Ayana's eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. "You would do this? For someone you don't know?" "I know enough," Elijah said simply. "I know you came here trying to help a sick child. I know you're being blamed for things that aren't your fault. And I know that sometimes doing right means standing alone." As they started toward the Henderson house, Reverend Mitchell called after them. "You're making a mistake, Washington. That woman is trouble." Elijah paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Reverend, I've been called trouble my whole life. Funny thing is, it's usually by people who profit from the way things are." He tipped his hat. "Good day to you all." But as they walked away, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than one sick baby or even one persecuted woman. The fear in these people's eyes was too deep, too desperate. They weren't just afraid of Ayana, they were terrified of something else entirely. And someone was using that fear to destroy an innocent woman. The Henderson house sat at the end of a dusty side street, a modest wooden structure that spoke of working-class respectability. Smoke rose from the chimney, but there was an air of desperate quiet about the place that Elijah recognized, the stillness that surrounded serious illness. As they approached the front porch, Ayana walked with increasing urgency, her healer's instincts clearly responding to some unheard call. "The baby's breathing," she murmured, her head tilted as if listening. "It's labored. We may not have much time." Elijah knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a young woman with red-rimmed eyes and worry lines etched deep around her mouth. This had to be Mrs. Henderson, barely 25, with auburn hair escaping from a hastily pinned bun and a stained apron that spoke of sleepless nights nursing a sick child. "Mrs. Henderson?" Elijah said gently. I'm Elijah Washington, new to the area. This is Miss Ayana Crowfeather. We heard your baby is sick. The woman's eyes darted between them, lingering on Ayana with a mixture of hope and fear. You're the Cherokee woman, the one they say... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The one they say practices witchcraft, Ayana said quietly. Yes, I've heard the accusations, but right now, Mrs. Henderson, your baby needs help, and I have knowledge that might save his life. Her life, Mrs. Henderson corrected automatically. Little Mary, she's been burning with fever for 2 days now. Won't take milk, barely takes water. I've tried everything I know, but... Her voice broke. From inside the house came a weak, rattling cough that made both women wince. May we come in? Elijah asked. Miss Crowfeather has experience with childhood fevers. If you're willing to let her try... Mrs. Henderson looked back toward the sound of her daughter's cough, then at Ayana's earnest face. Desperation won over fear. Please, she whispered, stepping aside. I don't care what they say about you. If you can help my Mary... The interior of the house was stifling, heated by a fire that had been stoked too high in an attempt to keep the baby warm. The air smelled of sickness and fear. In a corner of the main room, a wooden cradle held a tiny form that seemed almost lost among the blankets. Ayana moved immediately to the cradle, her hands already reaching for the leather pouch at her side. How long has she been fevering? She asked as she knelt beside the baby. Started Tuesday night, Mrs. Henderson replied, hovering anxiously. She was fussy all day, wouldn't eat proper. Then the fever came, and she's barely stirred since. Ayana gently placed her hand on the baby's forehead, then checked her pulse at the tiny wrist. The child was frighteningly still, her breathing shallow and rapid. The fever's very high, Ayana murmured, and there's congestion in the lungs. We need to act quickly. She began removing items from her pouch, dried bark, small cloth packets of herbs, a stone mortar and pestle worn smooth by generations of use. Mrs. Henderson, I need you to put water on to boil. Not too much, just enough for tea. And if you have honey... Yes, I do, Mrs. Henderson said, already moving toward the kitchen area. Will Mary be all right? I pray so, Ayana said simply, but we must work quickly. Elijah watched as she began her preparations, grinding willow bark with practiced efficiency. There was nothing mystical or frightening about her actions, just the careful, methodical work of someone who understood the properties of plants and the needs of the human body. Where did you learn this? He asked quietly. My grandmother, tall grass woman, Ayana replied without looking up from her work. She was the healer for our people for 50 years, taught me from the time I could walk. She paused in her grinding. She died last winter, told me I would need to carry the knowledge to new places, help new people. Is that why you came to Silverbrook? Ayana's hands stilled. She had a vision before she died, saw this place, these mountains. Said there would be great need here, great suffering. She made me promise to come. And you've been helping people since you arrived? I've tried, she said, resuming her work, but it's been difficult. The people here, they're afraid of anything they don't understand, and lately... She glanced toward the window, where voices could still be heard from the direction of the main street. Lately, they blame me for everything that goes wrong. Mrs. Henderson returned with a steaming kettle. The water's ready. Ayana carefully measured the ground willow bark into a small cloth bag, then steeped it in the hot water. While it brewed, she prepared a second mixture, elderflowers and something else Elijah didn't recognize. This will help her breathe easier, she explained, seeing his curious look. The congestion in her lungs is dangerous. If it gets worse... She didn't need to finish. They all understood the stakes. When the tea was ready, Ayana carefully lifted the baby from her cradle. Little Mary was frighteningly limp, her skin flushed with fever, and her breathing rapid and shallow. But she was conscious, her dark eyes following movement with the alertness that meant she was still fighting. There, little one, Ayana murmured, her voice taking on a musical quality that seemed to soothe the baby. We're going to help you feel better. Using a small spoon, She began administering the willow bark tea drop by drop, waiting patiently for the baby to swallow before giving more. It was delicate work. Too much too fast could cause choking, but the child needed the medicine quickly. "How long before we know if it's working?" Mrs. Henderson asked, wringing her hands. "The fever should begin to break within an hour," Ayana replied. "But the lung congestion may take longer to clear. We'll need to watch her carefully." As if summoned by her words, heavy footsteps sounded on the front porch, followed by a sharp knock. Mrs. Henderson paled. "Oh no, they followed you here." Elijah moved to the window and peered out. A group of men stood on the porch, led by Reverend Mitchell and the man Ayana had called Blackwood. Several carried rifles and their faces were grim with purpose. "Mrs. Henderson," Mitchell called out, "we know the Cherokee witch is in there. For the safety of your child, you need to let us remove her." "They think I'm cursing the baby, not healing her," Ayana said quietly, never pausing in her careful administration of the medicine. "Let me handle this," Elijah said, moving toward the door. "No," Mrs. Henderson said firmly, surprising them both. She straightened her shoulders and walked to the door herself, opening it just wide enough to face the men outside. "Reverend Mitchell, Mr. Blackwood. My baby is sick and these people are trying to help her." "Emma, you don't understand," Blackwood said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "This woman is dangerous. She's been cursing our town, causing the mine accidents. Now she's here with your sick child." "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Henderson interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "With all due respect, your mine accident started long before Miss Crow Feather arrived in town. I remember my husband talking about the unsafe conditions, the corners being cut to save money. Don't you dare blame that woman for your greed." A murmur ran through the group of men. Elijah felt a surge of respect for this young mother who was finding courage in the protection of her child. "Emma," Reverend Mitchell said more gently, "I understand you're desperate, but consorting with practitioners of witchcraft, is that what you call someone who knows how to make willow bark tea?" Mrs. Henderson shot back. "Because that's all she's doing, giving my baby the same remedy my own grandmother would have used." "It's more than that, and you know it," Blackwood insisted. "The accidents at the mine, the strange illnesses in town." "What strange illnesses?" Mrs. Henderson demanded. "You mean the lung sickness that's been going around every winter for years? The same lung sickness that killed 2 men the winter before Miss Crow Feather ever set foot in this territory." Inside the house, Elijah watched Ayana continue her patient work with the baby, even as the argument escalated outside. Little Mary had taken several spoonfuls of the tea now, and her breathing seemed slightly less labored. "Mrs. Henderson is right," he called out, loud enough to be heard on the porch. "I've been traveling through mining towns for months now, and the problems you're describing are common, wherever safety regulations are ignored. Blaming one woman for industrial accidents is just a way to avoid taking responsibility." "You don't know what you're talking about, stranger," one of the men called back. "You haven't seen what we've seen." "Then enlighten me," Elijah replied, stepping into the doorway beside Mrs. Henderson. "Tell me exactly what you've seen that proves Miss Crow Feather is responsible for your troubles." An uncomfortable silence fell. The men exchanged glances, but no one stepped forward with specific accusations. Finally, Reverend Mitchell spoke up. "It's not any one thing, it's the feeling in the town since she arrived, the sense of unease, of spiritual darkness." "Spiritual darkness," Elijah repeated slowly. "You mean the kind that comes from knowing you're treating an innocent person unjustly? The kind that comes from valuing profit over human lives? That kind of spiritual darkness?" Blackwood's face flushed red. "How dare you—" "How dare I what?" Elijah interrupted. "How dare I suggest that maybe your problems have natural causes instead of supernatural ones? How dare I point out that scapegoating is easier than taking responsibility?" From inside the house came a small sound, not quite a cry, but a soft vocalization that made Mrs. Henderson turn quickly back toward her baby. "The fever," Ayana said quietly, her hand on little Mary's forehead. "It's beginning to break." "Mrs." Henderson rushed to the cradle, her face transforming with hope as she felt her daughter's cooler skin. "She's better. Dear God, she's actually better." The change was subtle but unmistakable. The baby's breathing was easier, her color less flushed. She was beginning to move more normally, no longer lying in the frightening stillness of high fever. "The willow bark is working," Ayana explained, continuing to offer small sips of the tea. "But we'll need to continue treatment for several more hours to ensure the fever doesn't return." "Did you hear that?" Mrs. Henderson called out to the men on her porch. "My baby's fever is breaking. This woman, this healer, saved my daughter's life." But instead of the relief and gratitude Elijah expected, the news seemed to make the men more agitated, not less. "Witchcraft," one of them muttered. "No natural medicine works that fast." "It's a trick," another said. "She caused the sickness. Now she's pretending to cure it." Elijah felt his jaw clench. These people were so committed to their prejudice that they would rather believe in malevolent magic than accept evidence of benevolent healing. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying an edge of steel, "I suggest you return to your homes and your businesses. This baby is getting better, which is what we all wanted. Your presence here is no longer needed." "Our presence was never needed," Blackwood said coldly. "It was requested by concerned citizens worried about the spiritual welfare of this community." "And which citizens would those be?" Mrs. Henderson demanded. "Because I certainly didn't ask you to come here and threaten the woman who's saving my child's life." "Emma, you're overwrought," Reverend Mitchell said condescendingly. "You're not thinking clearly. When you've had time to consider—" "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," she snapped. "Clear enough to see that you're more interested in maintaining your authority than helping sick babies. Clear enough to see that you'd rather let a child die than admit you might be wrong about someone." The truth of her words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Several of the men shifted uncomfortably, and Elijah realized that not all of them were equally committed to this persecution. Some were here out of mob mentality rather than genuine conviction. "The baby's improving," he said, addressing the group as a whole. "That's a good thing regardless of how it happened. I suggest we all give thanks for that and let Mrs. Henderson care for her daughter in peace." "This isn't over," Blackwood said quietly, his eyes fixed on Ayana through the doorway. "Mark my words, no good will come of harboring a witch in this town." As the men finally dispersed, Elijah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The hatred in Blackwood's voice was too personal, too intense for simple religious prejudice. There was something else driving this persecution, something that made Ayana a threat beyond her healing abilities. But what could one Cherokee woman possibly know that would make her so dangerous to a mining town entrepreneur? The answer, he suspected, was buried somewhere in those accidental mine deaths. And if he was right, Ayana wasn't just fighting prejudice, she was fighting for her life. You're watching The Black Rancher, where we uncover the untold stories of courage from America's forgotten past. What you've just witnessed is only the beginning of a story that will challenge everything you think you know about justice, truth, and the price of standing up for what's right. If you're as invested in this story as I am, hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about real courage in the face of hatred. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? These are the stories that need to be told, and you won't want to miss what happens next, because what Elijah is about to discover will shock you. The real reason behind the mine accidents, the truth about the town's respected leaders, and the dangerous secret that makes Ayana a target, it's all coming together in ways that will leave you breathless. Let's continue with Chapter 3, where the mask comes off and the real enemy is revealed. The following morning, Henderson House dawn broke clear and cold over Silverbrook, painting the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. Elijah had spent the night in the Henderson parlor, keeping watch while Ayana monitored little Mary's recovery. The baby was markedly better, fever gone, breathing clear, taking milk eagerly for the first time in days. Mrs. Henderson moved about her kitchen with the renewed energy of a mother whose child had been pulled back from death's door. "I can never thank you enough," she said for the 10th time, addressing both Elijah and Ayana. "If you hadn't come when you did—" "Any healer would have done the same," Ayana replied modestly, though Elijah could see the satisfaction in her eyes. This was why she'd come to Silverbrook, to use her grandmother's knowledge to save lives. "That's just it, Mrs. Henderson said, setting down cups of strong coffee. "There should have been other healers here, there used to be. Old Mrs. Patterson knew herb lore, and Sarah Beth Murphy could set bones better than any doctor. But they're both gone now, and no one talks about why." Elijah felt his attention sharpen. "Gone how?" Mrs. Henderson glanced nervously toward the window, as if afraid of being overheard. "Mrs. Patterson died in a fire last spring, supposedly started by an overturned oil lamp, but—" She lowered her voice. "She was the most careful woman I ever knew, never would have left a lamp burning unattended." "And Sarah Beth?" Ayanna asked quietly. "Left town sudden-like in June, said she was going to visit family in Missouri, but she took everything with her. Everything. Like she wasn't planning to come back." Mrs. Henderson sat down heavily at the table. Both of them had been helping people for years. Both of them were, well, they were competition for Dr. Whitman when he was in town. "Competition," Elijah repeated thoughtfully. "Or maybe they knew things that certain people didn't want known." Before Mrs. Henderson could respond, rapid footsteps sounded on the front porch, followed by urgent knocking. Through the window, Elijah could see a young man, barely 18, with the lean build and calloused hands of a miner. Mrs. Henderson hurried to open the door. "Tommy Morrison, what's wrong?" "Mrs. Henderson, ma'am," the young man said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Is it true? Is the Cherokee woman here, the one they say can heal?" "Yes, she's here," Mrs. Henderson replied carefully. "Why?" Tommy Morrison's eyes found Ayanna across the room. "Please, miss, you got to come. There's been another accident at the mine, bad one. 3 men trapped, and one of them's my brother Jake." Ayanna was already reaching for her medicine pouch. "What kind of injuries?" "Cave-in," Tommy said. "We got 2 of them out, but Jake, his leg's crushed and he's bleeding something fierce. Dr. Whitman ain't back from Denver, and—" He swallowed hard. "Mr. Blackwood says we should just make Jake comfortable, if you know what I mean." "No," Ayanna said firmly. "I don't know what you mean, and I don't want to." "How long ago did this happen?" "Hour ago, maybe less. The other men, they're afraid to help. After yesterday, after what happened here with the Reverend and all, they're scared of crossing Mr. Blackwood." Elijah set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Mr. Blackwood seems to have strong opinions about who lives and dies in this town." "He owns the mine," Tommy said simply, as if that explained everything. "Owns most of the businesses, too. People need work, and he provides it. But lately—" He glanced around nervously. "Lately, it seems like working for him's gotten a lot more dangerous." "Tommy," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "how many accidents have there been at the mine since spring?" 8, he replied without hesitation. 8 serious ones. Used to be, we might have 1 bad accident a year, maybe 2, but since Mr. Blackwood took over full operations from his partner—" He shrugged helplessly. "Things changed." "Changed how?" Elijah asked. Tommy looked around again, clearly afraid of being overheard. "Faster work schedules, longer shifts, less time for proper shoring up of the tunnels, and the safety equipment." He shook his head. "We asked for better ropes, newer tools. Mr. Blackwood said the old equipment was fine, that we were just being lazy." Ayanna stood up, slinging her medicine pouch over her shoulder. "We're wasting time. Take me to your brother." "Miss," Tommy said desperately, "you got to understand. If Mr. Blackwood sees you at the mine, then Mr. Blackwood will see me at the mine," she replied simply. "A man's life is more important than one wealthy bully's opinion." Elijah grabbed his hat and coat. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to," Ayanna began. "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "Something's not right about these accidents, and I have a feeling you're going to need someone watching your back." The Silver Dollar Mine sat like a wound in the mountainside, its entrance yawning dark against the rocky slope. Even from a distance, Elijah could see the chaos. Men clustered around the mine entrance, some supporting injured colleagues, others simply standing in shocked silence. The acrid smell of rock dust and fear hung heavy in the morning air. As they approached, conversations died. Miners stepped aside, their faces showing a mixture of hope and terror as they recognized Ayanna. Some crossed themselves, whether in prayer or protection, Elijah couldn't tell. "Where's the injured man?" Ayana asked, all business despite the hostile stares. "In the foreman's shack," Tommy said, pointing to a rough wooden building near the mine entrance. "We didn't dare move him far with his leg like it is." They were halfway to the shack when a commanding voice rang out across the mining camp. "Stop right there!" Blackwood emerged from the mine office, his expensive suit incongruous among the work clothes and mining equipment. Behind him walked a shorter, stockier man with the bearing of someone used to giving orders. The mine foreman, most likely. "Morrison," Blackwood called to Tommy, "I thought I made it clear that we don't need outside help." "Mr. Blackwood, sir," Tommy replied, his voice respectful but desperate. "My brother's hurt bad, really bad. And this lady, she helped the Henderson baby." "The Henderson baby had a simple fever," Blackwood interrupted. "This is different. This is men's work, dangerous work. Not suitable for primitive remedies." Elijah felt his temper flare. "Primitive remedies? You mean the kind that actually work?" Blackwood's cold gaze shifted to him. "Mr. Washington, isn't it? The new landowner. I'd suggest you focus on your own affairs rather than involving yourself in mine operations." "I'm making this my affair," Elijah replied evenly. "When I see a man bleeding to death while people argue about pride and prejudice." "Jake Morrison isn't bleeding to death," Blackwood said dismissively. "He has a broken leg. We've made him comfortable. And when Dr. Whitman returns—" "When Dr. Whitman returns, it may be too late," Ayana interrupted. "Broken bones that aren't properly set can lead to infection, permanent disability, even death if blood loss is severe." "And you believe you're qualified to treat such injuries?" Blackwood asked with obvious skepticism. "I've set dozens of broken bones," Ayana replied calmly. "Arms, legs, ribs. My grandmother taught me to read the angles, to feel where the break is clean and where it's splintered. I can also make medicines to prevent infection and control pain." "Primitive superstition," Blackwood said flatly. A new voice joined the conversation. "What's superstitious about willow bark for pain, or honey for preventing infection?" Mrs. Henderson had followed them from town, little Mary bundled in her arms. "What's superstitious about saving my baby's life?" Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Henderson, you're overwrought." "I'm perfectly calm, Mr. Blackwood. Calm enough to ask why you're so determined to prevent treatment for an injured man. Calm enough to wonder what you're afraid of." "I'm not afraid of anything," Blackwood snapped. "I'm trying to prevent this woman from making a bad situation worse with her heathen practices." "Then let me ask you this," Elijah said, his voice carrying across the gathered miners. "If Miss Crowfeather's healing is so dangerous, so unreliable, why is the Henderson baby healthy and happy this morning? Why is Mrs. Henderson here thanking the woman who saved her child's life?" A murmur ran through the crowd of miners. Several nodded in agreement, and Elijah could see doubt beginning to crack the facade of fear that Blackwood had built around Ayana. "The Henderson baby was never in real danger," Blackwood insisted. "Children's fevers break naturally. After 2 days of high fever, that was killing her," Mrs. Henderson interrupted angrily. "Don't you dare minimize what this woman did for my family." From inside the foreman's shack came a low moan of pain that cut through the argument like a knife. Tommy Morrison flinched as if physically struck. "That's my brother," he said desperately. "Please, Mr. Blackwood, let her try. If Dr. Whitman was here, you'd let him try." "Dr. Whitman is a trained physician." "Dr. Whitman isn't here," Ayana said firmly. "I am, and that man is suffering." She started walking toward the shack, ignoring Blackwood's protests. After a moment's hesitation, Tommy followed her, then Elijah, then several of the miners. Blackwood found himself trailing behind his own employees, his authority visibly cracking. Inside the rough wooden building, Jake Morrison lay on a makeshift bed of blankets and mining equipment. Elijah had seen plenty of injuries during his time in the cavalry, but this was bad. The young man's right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and blood had soaked through the crude bandages wrapped around his thigh. Jake was conscious but clearly in agony, his face gray with pain and shock. "Tommy," he whispered as they entered. "I'm here, Jake, and I brought help." Ayana knelt beside the injured man, her hands moving with practiced confidence as she assessed the damage. "Jake, I'm Ayana Crowfeather. I'm going to examine your leg, see how bad the break is. It may hurt, but I need to know what I'm working with." Do whatever you got to do," Jake managed through gritted teeth. As Ayanna carefully probed the injury, Elijah watched Blackwood's face. The mine owner was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes. Not just anger or frustration, but genuine fear. The kind of fear that came from having something important at stake. "The break is clean," Ayanna announced after a tense few minutes. "No bone fragments that I can feel, though there's significant soft tissue damage. The bleeding is from torn muscle, not a severed artery, which is good news." "Can you fix it?" Tommy asked anxiously. "I can set the bone and stop the bleeding," Ayanna replied. "But I'll need help, and I'll need some supplies, clean cloth, hot water, and some strong whiskey if you have it." "I'll get whatever you need," Tommy said quickly. "Now, wait just a minute," Blackwood protested. "I haven't authorized any treatment. This man is in my employ and I'm responsible for his welfare." "Then act responsibly," Elijah said bluntly. "Let her help him. You don't understand the liability issues involved." "Liability?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was sharp with outrage. "Your liability is letting him die when help is available." "The liability," said a new voice from the doorway, "is in the unsafe working conditions that caused this accident in the first place." Everyone turned to see an older miner standing in the entrance, a man with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades underground. His clothes were dirty with rock dust, and there was grim determination in his eyes. "Frank Kowalski," Blackwood said warningly. "You're out of line." "Am I?" Frank stepped into the shack, his gaze taking in Jake's injuries. "Because I've been mining for 30 years, Mr. Blackwood. 30 years. And I've never seen so many accidents in such a short time. Mining is dangerous work." "Mining is dangerous," Frank agreed, "but it doesn't have to be deadly. Not when proper safety measures are followed, not when equipment is maintained, not when men aren't pushed to work faster than is safe." A murmur of agreement came from the miners gathered outside the shack. Elijah could feel the mood shifting, the fear that had kept these men silent beginning to transform into anger. "What are you suggesting?" Blackwood asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm suggesting," Frank said, meeting his employer's gaze steadily, "that maybe these accidents aren't as accidental as you'd like us to believe. I'm suggesting that cutting corners on safety to increase profits has consequences. And I'm suggesting that blaming a Cherokee healer for problems you created is the act of a coward." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Blackwood's face had gone white, then flushed deep red. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled. "Frank Kowalski, you're fired. Clear out your gear and get off my property." "Fine by me," Frank replied calmly. "But that doesn't change the truth. These men deserve to know why their friends are dying." "The truth," Blackwood snarled, "is that mining is inherently dangerous, and some people are too stupid or too careless to follow basic safety procedures." "The truth," Frank interrupted, his voice rising, "is that you've been pushing quotas that require men to skip safety checks. The truth is that you've been using substandard equipment because it's cheaper. The truth is that you've ignored every safety recommendation I've made for the last 6 months." "That's enough," Blackwood shouted. But Frank wasn't finished. "And the truth is that when people started getting hurt, when families started asking questions, you needed someone to blame. Someone who couldn't fight back. Someone who was already an outsider." His gaze shifted to Ayanna, who was still kneeling beside Jake Morrison, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "You picked the wrong scapegoat, Blackwood. This woman is a healer, not a curse. And any man with eyes can see that the only evil in this camp is the greed that values profit over human life." The miners outside had gone completely silent, hanging on every word. Elijah could feel the weight of revelation settling over them, the understanding that their suffering had a very human cause. "Frank's right," said another voice, then another. "He's telling the truth. Been saying it for months. Blackwood don't care if we live or die." "Shut up!" Blackwood screamed, his composure finally cracking completely. "All of you, shut up. I own this mine. I employ every one of you worthless." "Please," Jake Morrison whispered from his makeshift bed. "Please, just let her help me. I don't care about none of this other stuff. I just I hurt so bad." His brother Tommy was openly crying now. "Please, Mr. Blackwood, please just let her try." Ayana looked up from her patient, her dark eyes meeting Blackwood's furious gaze. "Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, "your argument is with these men, not with me. But this man, this injured, suffering man, he needs help now. Whether you believe in my abilities or not, whether you approve of me or not, he's in pain. Are you really going to let pride and prejudice prevent treatment?" For a moment, something flickered across Blackwood's face, perhaps a trace of the conscience he'd buried beneath greed and fear. But then his expression hardened again. "No," he said flatly. "I will not allow untrained, primitive treatments on my employee. Jake Morrison will wait for proper medical attention, even if that means waiting for Dr. Whitman to return." "And if he dies while we wait?" Elijah asked. "Then that's God's will," Blackwood replied coldly. The words hung in the air like a curse. Even some of the miners who had been afraid to speak up looked shocked by the callousness of their employer's response. "God's will, Mrs." Henderson repeated, her voice thick with disgust. "Or your pride. Either way," Frank Kowalski said grimly, "Jake Morrison pays the price for it." But Ayana was already moving, her hands returning to her medicine pouch. "Mr. Blackwood," she said without looking up, "you can fire me, you can have me arrested, you can do whatever you think you need to do, but I will not stand by and watch a man suffer when I have the knowledge to help him." "You will not treat him," Blackwood said, his voice shaking with rage. "I forbid it." "Then you'll have to stop me," Ayana replied calmly, beginning to remove supplies from her pouch. Blackwood took a step forward, his hand moving toward the pistol at his belt. The gesture was small, almost unconscious, but every man in the shack saw it. "Mr. Blackwood," Elijah said quietly, his own hand moving to rest on his gun, "I wouldn't recommend that course of action." The mine owner froze, suddenly aware that he was outnumbered by men who were rapidly losing faith in his leadership. Frank Kowalski had moved closer, and several other miners had entered the shack. Their faces showed a mixture of anger and determination that spoke of a dam about to burst. "You're all making a mistake," Blackwood said, backing toward the door. "A serious mistake. This woman is dangerous, and when people start dying because of her witchcraft—" "The only people who've been dying," Frank interrupted, "are the ones working for you. Funny how that works." Blackwood's face twisted with fury, but he seemed to realize that he'd lost control of the situation. "This isn't over," he snarled, his gaze sweeping across the gathered faces. "Mark my words, no good will come of this. No good at all." He stormed out of the shack, leaving behind a silence that was somehow both relieved and ominous. "Tommy," Ayana said calmly, as if the confrontation had never happened, "I still need that hot water and whiskey, and someone should find me some strong cloth for splinting, wood strips if you have them." As the miners hurried to gather supplies, Elijah remained in the shack, watching Ayana work. Her hands were steady, her voice soothing as she spoke to Jake Morrison about what she was going to do. "Miss Crowfeather," he said quietly, "you realize you've just made a very dangerous enemy." "I've had dangerous enemies before," she replied without looking up. "But I've also learned something important. Sometimes the only way to defeat darkness is to shine a light on it. And sometimes that light has to come from the people everyone else has given up on." "What do you mean?" She glanced up at him, her dark eyes serious. "Frank Kowalski is right about the mine accidents, but he doesn't know the whole truth. There's something else going on here, something that goes beyond simple greed and carelessness." "What kind of something?" "The kind that gets people killed for asking too many questions, the kind that makes a mining town owner desperate enough to scapegoat an outsider." She returned her attention to Jake's leg. "Mr. Washington, I think we're about to uncover a secret that certain people will kill to protect." Before Elijah could ask what she meant, Tommy Morrison returned with the supplies, followed by several other miners eager to help. As Ayana began the delicate work of setting Jake's broken leg, Elijah found himself wondering what other dark truths lay buried beneath the Colorado mountains, and what price they would all pay for bringing them into the light. Later that afternoon, Morrison family cabin. Jake Morrison's leg was set and splinted, the bleeding stopped, and the young miner was resting comfortably in his family's small cabin on the outskirts of town. The transformation in his condition was remarkable, from grey-faced agony to peaceful sleep in the span of a few hours. Elijah sat on the cabin's front porch with Tommy Morrison, watching Ayana check on her patient through the open doorway. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the mountain valley. "She saved his life," Tommy said quietly. "No question about it. If we'd waited for Dr. Whitman—" "Your brother's a lucky man," Elijah agreed. "Lucky to have you willing to stand up to Blackwood." Tommy shook his head. "Wasn't luck. Was desperation. Jake's all the family I got left since Ma and Pa died. Couldn't just watch him." He trailed off, then looked directly at Elijah. "Mr. Washington, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Why'd you help us? You don't know us, don't owe us nothing. And standing up to Blackwood, that ain't exactly good for your business prospects in this territory?" Elijah considered the question, watching Ayana's gentle movements as she adjusted Jake's bandages. "I suppose it's because I know what it's like to be judged by what you look like instead of who you are. Know what it's like to be blamed for things that aren't your fault." "Because you're colored?" "That's part of it," Elijah admitted. "But it's more than that. I've seen what happens when good people stay silent while bad people run roughshod over anyone who can't fight back. Eventually, the darkness spreads to everyone." Tommy nodded slowly. "Like what's happening here." "Exactly like what's happening here." Elijah leaned forward in his chair. "Tommy, tell me about these mine accidents." Frank Kowalski said they started about 6 months ago. Little before that, actually. Started right after Mr. Blackwood bought out his partner. Blackwood had a partner. "Yes, sir. Mr. Jameson. Nice man, fair man. Always made sure we had proper equipment, proper safety procedures. But he got sick last winter, lung fever, and Mr. Blackwood convinced him to sell his share of the mine." Elijah felt a chill. "Lung fever?" "Yes, sir. Came on sudden like. One day he was healthy as a horse. Next day he could barely breathe. Dr. Whitman tried everything, but—" Tommy shrugged helplessly. "Mr. Jameson died within a week. And Blackwood immediately took over full operations. Within days. Changed everything. Work schedules, safety procedures, even the way we got paid. Said we needed to be more efficient to compete with the bigger mining operations." Ayana emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. "Jake's sleeping peacefully," she reported. "The fever is controlled and the bone is set properly. He should heal well, though he'll need to stay off that leg for several weeks." "Thank God," Tommy said fervently. "Miss Crowfeather, I can't never repay you for what you done." "Seeing him recover is payment enough," she replied, but her expression was troubled as she looked toward the town. "Tommy, can you tell me about the other men who've been hurt in the mine? The ones who died?" Tommy's face darkened. 3 dead so far. Bill Peterson, cave-in got him in May. Samuel Rodriguez, gas explosion in July. And just last month, Henry Kowalski, that's Frank's boy, roof collapse." "All accidental deaths?" Elijah asked. "Supposed to be. But—" Tommy glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "Henry Kowalski, he'd been asking questions. About the safety equipment, about why certain procedures had been changed. He was talking about writing to the territorial authorities, maybe getting an inspector up here. And then he died in a roof collapse," Ayana said grimly. "Yes, ma'am. Frank says it wasn't no accident, but he can't prove nothing. And after Henry died, the rest of us, well, we got scared. Stopped asking questions, stopped complaining about the safety issues. Until today," Elijah observed. "Today was different. Today Mr. Blackwood showed his true colors in front of everybody. Hard to keep pretending he's a good man when he'd rather let my brother die than admit he might be wrong about something." Ayana was staring toward the mine, her expression distant. "Tommy, has anyone else in town gotten sick recently? Besides the mine accidents, I mean. Any mysterious illnesses?" "Well, there was Mr. Jameson, like I mentioned, and old Mrs. Patterson, the herb woman who died in that fire. She'd been feeling poorly for weeks before the fire. Said she felt like someone was watching her, following her around." "Following her?" Elijah's attention sharpened. "Yes, sir. She told my ma that she'd seen the same man near her house several times, Always when she was coming back from gathering herbs or treating folks, scared her something fierce. Did she describe this man? Tommy frowned, trying to remember. Big fellow, she said. Well-dressed, not local. Wore a fancy suit and had real pale skin, like he spent all his time indoors. Elijah and Ayana exchanged glances. Sounds like it could have been Blackwood, Elijah said. Could have been, Tommy agreed, though Mrs. Patterson never said the name. Then she died in that fire, and we never found out who was bothering her. What about Sarah Beth Murphy? Ayana asked. The woman who could set bones. Did she mention anyone bothering her before she left town? Funny you should ask, Tommy said slowly. Ma talked to Sarah Beth right before she left. Sarah Beth was scared, real scared. Said someone had offered to buy her property for way more than it was worth. But when she refused, strange things started happening. What kind of strange things? Her garden got poisoned. All her medicinal plants died overnight. Someone broke into her house and went through her medical supplies. And she swore someone was putting something in her well water, making her sick every time she drank from it. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, and Elijah didn't like what he was seeing. Tommy, both Mrs. Patterson and Sarah Beth Murphy were healers, weren't they? People who knew about traditional medicine. Yes, sir. Best healers in the territory, outside of the Cherokee woman here. He nodded toward Ayana. People used to say that between the three of them, they could cure just about anything that ailed you. And now Mrs. Patterson is dead, Sarah Beth has been driven away, and they're trying to do the same thing to Miss Crow Feather, Elijah said grimly. But why? Tommy asked. What's the point of driving away healers? Ayana answered before Elijah could. Because healers ask questions. We see things that others might miss. We know the difference between natural illness and... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Unnatural causes. You think someone's been poisoning people? Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. I think, Ayana said carefully, that someone very much wants to control who lives and dies in this town, and traditional healers, people who understand plants and their effects, might be able to recognize things that a conventional doctor wouldn't think to look for. Tommy's face had gone pale. You're talking about Mr. Jameson, aren't you? You think someone poisoned him? I think it's a possibility worth investigating, Elijah replied, and I think that's why Miss Crow Feather is being blamed for the mine accidents. If people are focused on her as a threat, they won't be looking at the real cause of their problems. But that's... Tommy struggled with the implications. That's murder. Multiple murders. Yes, Ayana said simply. I believe it is. Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the afternoon quiet. 4 riders were coming up the trail toward the Morrison cabin, and even at a distance, their intent looked anything but friendly. Tommy, Elijah said quietly, get inside and stay with your brother. Miss Crow Feather, I think we're about to have company. The riders resolved into familiar faces as they drew closer. Reverend Mitchell, Sheriff Coleman, and 2 men Elijah didn't recognize, deputies from the look of their badges. All 4 men were armed, and their expressions were grim with purpose. They reined in their horses at the edge of the cabin's small yard. Sheriff Coleman, a thin man with graying hair and nervous eyes, spoke first. Ayana Crow Feather, you're under arrest for practicing witchcraft and endangering the lives of citizens of Silverbrook. On whose authority? Elijah asked, stepping forward. On my authority as duly appointed sheriff of this county, Coleman replied, though his voice lacked conviction. And on the sworn complaint of several prominent citizens. What prominent citizens? Elijah pressed. That's not your concern, Washington, Reverend Mitchell interjected. What concerns you should be the spiritual welfare of this community. This woman is a threat to Christian souls. The only threat I see, Elijah replied evenly, is to a man's conscience when he lets prejudice override common sense. One of the deputies, a large man with the look of a hired gun rather than a lawman, shifted in his saddle. You want to step aside, mister. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me plenty, Elijah said, his hand moving to rest casually on his gun belt. Miss Crow Feather is under my protection. Your protection doesn't supersede the law, Sheriff Coleman said, though he was eyeing Elijah's gun with obvious nervousness. What law? Elijah demanded. Show me the territorial statute that makes healing a crime. Show me the federal law that makes it illegal to help a sick baby or set a broken leg. It's not the healing, Mitchell said stiffly. It's the methods, the ungodly heathen methods that invoke dark spirits. Willow bark tea? Elijah interrupted. Honey for infection? Clean bandages and proper splinting? Those are your dark spirits? You don't understand, Coleman said desperately. There have been complaints, serious complaints. People are scared. People are being told to be scared, Elijah corrected. There's a difference. From inside the cabin came Jake Morrison's voice, weak but determined. Sheriff Coleman, you leave that woman alone. She saved my life today. Saved it when others would have let me die. Tommy Morrison appeared in the doorway, his young face set with determination. That's right, Sheriff. And anyone who wants to arrest her for helping my brother is going to have to go through me first. And me, came another voice. Frank Kowalski emerged from the tree line, followed by 3 other miners. All were armed. All looked determined. Frank, Sheriff Coleman said nervously, you're interfering with official business. I'm protecting a woman who saved a man's life from people who'd rather see him dead than admit they were wrong, Frank replied bluntly. You want to call that interference, that's your choice. The sheriff looked around at the gathering crowd, Elijah with his hand near his gun, the armed miners showing clear solidarity with Ayanna, even Mrs. Henderson visible in the distance with her healthy baby. The mathematics of the situation were not in his favor. This is madness, Reverend Mitchell declared. You're all being deceived by this witch. Can't you see she's turned you against each other, against the natural order? The natural order, Frank Kowalski said with bitter irony, where men die in preventable accidents, while the mine owner gets richer, where healers are blamed for the crimes of murderers? That natural order, Reverend? What are you talking about? One of the deputies demanded. Frank looked directly at Sheriff Coleman. I'm talking about the fact that James Jameson was poisoned. I'm talking about the fact that the mine accidents aren't accidents. I'm talking about the fact that someone in this town has been committing murder and using fear and prejudice to cover their tracks. A stunned silence fell over the group. Even the deputies looked shaken by the blunt accusation. That's a serious charge, Frank, Sheriff Coleman said slowly. It's a serious crime, Frank replied. And if you were doing your job instead of taking orders from certain prominent citizens, you might have noticed the pattern by now. What pattern? Every person who's died or been driven away was either asking questions about the mine's safety practices or was knowledgeable about poisons and their effects. Every single one, Sheriff, that's not coincidence. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice clear and carrying. Sheriff Coleman, I believe Frank Kowalski is correct. I believe someone has been using poison to eliminate people who posed a threat to their plans, and I believe I can prove it. How? Coleman asked, though he was looking increasingly uncomfortable. By examining the bodies of the men who died in the mine. Certain poisons leave traces in the body that persist even after death. If someone was using something like mercury or arsenic to weaken men before staging accidents, there would be evidence. That's a serious allegation, the sheriff said weakly. It's a serious crime, Elijah added. The question is, are you going to investigate it, or are you going to keep arresting the people who are trying to expose it? Sheriff Coleman looked around at the armed miners, then at his own men. The deputies were shifting nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. I need to consult with the territorial authorities, he said finally. This is beyond my... Your what? Frank demanded. Your authority or your courage? Before the sheriff could answer, the sound of a single gunshot echoed across the mountain valley. It came from the direction of town, sharp and ominous in the afternoon air. Tommy Morrison went pale. That came from the mine, or the mine office, one of the miners added grimly. Without another word, the entire group, lawmen, miners, and civilians alike, began moving toward town. Whatever was happening at the Silver Dollar mine, it was going to change everything. And Elijah had a sinking feeling that Blackwood had just made his most desperate move yet. You're watching The Black Rancher, and what you've just witnessed is the moment when truth begins to shatter the lies that evil men build to protect themselves. But the most shocking revelations are still coming. If this story has gripped you the way it's gripped me, smash that like button and share this video with everyone who needs to hear about real courage in the face of corruption. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because the final chapter of this story will expose a conspiracy so dark you'll never look at small-town politics the same way again. The gunshot you just heard? That's the sound of a desperate man making his final play. What Elijah and Ayanna are about to discover will shock you, inspire you, and prove that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. This is The Black Rancher, where forgotten heroes get the recognition they deserve. Stay with us for the explosive conclusion. Silverbrook, Main Street, late afternoon. The group racing toward town created a cloud of dust that could be seen from miles away. Miners, lawmen, and civilians, all moving with the urgency of people who knew something terrible was about to unfold. As they reached the main street, the cause of the gunshot became immediately apparent. The door to Blackwood's mine office hung open, splintered as if it had been kicked in. Smoke was visible through the windows, and papers were scattered across the front porch like leaves in a windstorm. "What in the hell?" Sheriff Coleman began, but his words were cut off by a voice from inside the building. "Stay back! All of you, stay back!" It was Blackwood, his usually controlled voice high with panic. Through the open doorway, they could see him standing behind his desk, a smoking pistol in one hand and a thick ledger in the other. "Mr. Blackwood?" Coleman called out cautiously. "What's going on here?" "What's going on," Blackwood replied, his voice gaining a manic edge, "is that certain people have been asking too many questions. Certain people have been sticking their noses where they don't belong." Frank Kowalski pushed forward. "Blackwood, what have you done?" "What I had to do," Blackwood screamed. "What I've always had to do to protect my investments, my future. You think I was going to let a bunch of ignorant miners and a savage witch destroy everything I've built?" Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. This was a man on the edge, a man with nothing left to lose. "Mr. Blackwood," he said carefully, "why don't you put down the gun and we can talk about this?" "Talk?" Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Oh, I think the time for talking is over, Washington. Just like it was over for James Jameson when he started asking about safety inspections. Just like it was over for Henry Kowalski when he threatened to write to the territorial authorities." The admission hung in the air like smoke from the gun. Frank Kowalski's face went white, then red with rage. "You killed my boy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You murdered my son." "Your son was interfering with business," Blackwood replied coldly, "making threats, stirring up trouble. I gave him opportunities to back down, to mind his own affairs. He chose not to listen." "You poisoned him," Ayanna said, stepping forward despite Elijah's restraining hand. "You made him sick, weak, before you staged the roof collapse. That's why you needed to eliminate the healers, because we would have recognized the signs of poisoning." Blackwood's eyes fixed on her with undisguised hatred. "Very good, Cherokee witch. You're almost as smart as your grandmother was." The words hit Ayanna like a physical blow. "What did you say?" "Oh yes, I knew about Tall Grass Woman, knew about her knowledge of plants and poisons. Did you really think it was coincidence that I ended up in this specific territory? That I happened to buy a mine in the exact area where the most knowledgeable Cherokee healer lived?" Ayanna's face had gone pale. You killed my grandmother?" "I killed a problem," Blackwood said with chilling indifference. "An old woman who could identify every poison that grows in these mountains, who knew the difference between natural death and assisted death. She was becoming inconvenient." "You bastard," Frank Kowalski snarled, starting forward. Blackwood swung the gun toward him. "I wouldn't if I were you. I've got nothing left to lose now, thanks to all of you interfering busybodies." Sheriff Coleman raised his hands placatingly. "Mr. Blackwood, let's think about this. If you surrender now, cooperate with the investigation." "Cooperate?" Blackwood laughed bitterly. "Sheriff, you still don't understand, do you? This goes far beyond one mine, one territory. I've got investors in Denver, partners in Chicago, men who've put serious money into operations that require flexibility, in how business is conducted. What are you talking about? Coleman asked. I'm talking about a network, Sheriff. Mining operations, railroad development, land acquisition, all requiring the removal of inconvenient obstacles. Obstacles like safety-conscious partners, like knowledgeable healers, like miners who ask too many questions. The scope of what Blackwood was describing began to sink in. This wasn't just about one corrupt mine owner. This was about systematic murder to facilitate corporate expansion. How many? Elijah asked quietly. How many people have you killed? Enough, Blackwood replied. Jameson was the first here, but not the first overall. There have been others in other territories, other towns. Anyone who threatened to expose our methods or interfere with our timeline. And the mine accidents. Tommy Morrison called out from the edge of the crowd. Convenient cover, Blackwood admitted. Poison a man first, mercury in his water, arsenic in his food. Make him weak, disoriented. Then arrange an accident when he's too sick to react properly. Who's going to question a mining accident? Especially when there's a convenient Cherokee witch to blame for the increase in deaths. Ayana's hands were clenched into fists, her entire body trembling with rage and grief. You planned this from the beginning. You came here specifically to eliminate my grandmother and take over the territory. Your grandmother was researching the effects of mercury poisoning, Blackwood said. Had started asking questions about why so many men in mining camps were showing similar symptoms. She was getting too close to the truth. So you murdered her and made it look like illness, Elijah said grimly. Lung fever, Blackwood confirmed. Same thing I used on Jameson, on several others. A little mercury in the water supply, presented as a natural outbreak of respiratory illness. Your grandmother was too smart for her own good, figured out what was happening and started making inquiries about who might have access to mercury compounds. And when she died, you knew other healers might eventually figure out the same thing, Ayana said, understanding flooding her voice. So you had to eliminate them too. Mrs. Patterson and Sarah Beth Murphy were getting close, Blackwood agreed. Patterson had started connecting the dots between the mining accidents and certain symptoms she'd observed. Murphy had begun asking questions about the high number of broken bones in supposedly experienced miners, men who should have known better than to put themselves in danger. Because you were poisoning them first, Frank realized, making them clumsy, weak, before staging the accidents. Efficiency, Blackwood said with pride that chilled everyone present. Why risk a mining accident with a healthy man when a poisoned man is so much more cooperative? You're insane, Mrs. Henderson said from the crowd that had gathered. I'm practical, Blackwood corrected. Do you have any idea how much money is involved in territorial development? How many fortunes depend on clearing obstacles quickly and efficiently? I'm just one small part of a much larger operation. What larger operation? Sheriff Coleman demanded. But before Blackwood could answer, his attention was caught by something behind the crowd. His face, already flushed with manic energy, went completely white. No, he whispered. No, you're supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be... Everyone turned to see what had terrified him so completely. Walking slowly up the main street, leaning heavily on a walking stick but very much alive, was an elderly Cherokee woman. She was dressed in traditional clothing, mixed with frontier practical wear, her long gray hair braided with feathers and silver ornaments. Despite her obvious age and the walking stick, there was something regal, powerful about her bearing. Ayana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Grandmother? The old woman's eyes found Ayana in the crowd, and her weathered face broke into a gentle smile. Hello, little healer. I told you this place would need you. But you died, Ayana whispered. I saw you die. The lung fever that would have killed me, yes, Tallgrass woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent street. If I hadn't recognized the taste of mercury in my water soon enough to begin treating myself. Blackwood's gun was shaking in his hand. Impossible. I watched you. You were dying. I was very sick, the old woman agreed calmly. Sick enough that I had to appear to die in order to investigate safely. Sick enough that I had to send my granddaughter away while I recovered and gathered evidence. Evidence? Sheriff Coleman stepped forward eagerly. Evidence, Tall Grass Woman confirmed, producing a small leather pouch from her clothing. Water samples showing mercury contamination. Plant samples showing where the poison was being introduced. And, she smiled grimly, records of financial transactions between certain mining operations and certain suppliers of industrial chemicals. How did you, Blackwood began. How did I gather evidence while appearing to be dead? Tall Grass Woman asked. It's amazing how invisible an old Cherokee woman can be when people believe she's already buried. Amazing how much you can observe when no one thinks you're watching. Elijah felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable woman who had faked her own death to protect her granddaughter and investigate a murder conspiracy. You've been watching this whole time? He asked. Since spring, she confirmed. Watching, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. When I saw that my granddaughter was in danger, when I saw good people like you willing to stand up for justice, I knew the time had come. Blackwood was backing toward the rear of his office, the gun still in his hand, but his confidence clearly shattered. It doesn't matter, he said desperately. Even if you have evidence, even if you can prove what I've done here, the organization is bigger than one territory. There are others, other operations. Yes, Tall Grass Woman said simply, and we have evidence of those too. We. Blackwood's voice cracked. From various positions around the town, figures began emerging from concealment. Native Americans mostly, but also some white men and women, people who had been watching, waiting, gathering information about the conspiracy that Blackwood had described. Did you really think, Tall Grass Woman asked gently, that a network of murderers could operate across multiple territories without someone noticing? Without the people whose lands were being stolen and whose families were being killed starting to organize a response? My grandmother, Ayanna said with dawning understanding, your vision about coming here, it wasn't just about healing. It was about justice. Justice and healing often go hand in hand, Tall Grass Woman replied. You came here to help people, to use your knowledge to save lives. I came here to make sure that the people responsible for taking lives would face consequences. Sheriff Coleman was looking around at the new arrivals with obvious nervousness. Now see here, I don't know what kind of vigilante operation this is supposed to be, but not vigilante, said a new voice. A man in a territorial marshal's badge stepped forward from the crowd. Federal investigation. We've been tracking this conspiracy for months, gathering evidence of interstate murder and fraud. Marshal Davidson, Tall Grass Woman said with a respectful nod. I believe you'll find the evidence we've gathered quite comprehensive. Davidson looked at the still-armed Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and violation of federal mining safety regulations. You have the right to— No! Blackwood screamed, raising his gun. I won't hang for doing what had to be done. I won't— The gunshot that followed came not from Blackwood's weapon, but from Frank Kowalski's rifle. The mine owner dropped his pistol and collapsed behind his desk, clutching his shoulder. That was for my boy, Frank said grimly, and for all the others you murdered. As the marshal and his men moved in to secure Blackwood, Ayanna ran to her grandmother's side. The old woman embraced her granddaughter tenderly, and for the first time since this ordeal began, Ayanna allowed herself to cry, tears of relief, of grief, of overwhelming gratitude. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered. You can never lose me, little healer, Tall Grass Woman replied softly. As long as you carry the knowledge, as long as you use it to help others, I am always with you. Elijah watched the reunion with deep satisfaction, but his attention was also on the broader implications of what had been revealed. Marshal Davidson, he said, this conspiracy Blackwood mentioned, how far does it reach? Far enough, Davidson replied grimly. We've identified similar operations in at least 6 territories. Mining companies, railroad development, land speculation, all using intimidation, murder, and fraud to clear obstacles to development. And now? Now we have enough evidence to bring down the entire network, the marshal said with satisfaction, thanks to people like Tall Grass Woman and the others who've been gathering information at great personal risk. Tommy Morrison approached the group, his young face still showing the strain of the day's revelations. Marshal, What about the mine? What about the men who work there? The mine will be placed under federal oversight pending investigation, Davidson replied. New safety measures will be implemented immediately, and the territorial government will be appointing new management. Your jobs are safe. Frank Kowalski, who had been silent since shooting Blackwood, suddenly spoke up. What about justice for the men who died? For Henry, for the others? There will be trials, Davidson assured him. Full trials with all the evidence presented. The men responsible for your son's death will face the consequences of their actions. As Blackwood was carried away under guard, still alive but no longer a threat, Tall Grass Woman turned to address the crowd that had gathered. People of Silverbrook, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air, what has happened here is both an ending and a beginning. An ending to the fear and deception that has plagued your community, a beginning of justice, of truth, of healing. She looked directly at Ayanna. My granddaughter came here as I knew she would, drawn by a vision of people in need. She found not just sick babies and broken bones to heal, but a community whose very soul was wounded by lies and fear. And she found allies, Elijah added, stepping forward. People willing to stand up for what's right, regardless of the cost. Yes, Tall Grass Woman agreed, her gaze moving to Frank Kowalski, to the Morrison brothers, to Mrs. Henderson with her healthy baby. She found the kind of courage that makes real change possible. Reverend Mitchell, who had been conspicuously quiet during the revelations, finally stepped forward. His face showed shame and something that might have been genuine repentance. Miss Crow Feather, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. A profound apology. I allowed fear and prejudice to blind me to the truth. I'm sorry. Ayanna studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Reverend Mitchell, healing isn't just about treating injuries or illness. Sometimes it's about healing the wounds we cause with our words, our judgments, our fears. If you're truly sorry, then help me heal this community's wounds. How? By using your influence to teach tolerance instead of fear, by helping people understand that wisdom and healing can come from many sources, many traditions, by ensuring that what happened here never happens again. The Reverend nodded slowly. I will try. I will do better. As the crowd began to disperse, the immediate crisis resolved, Elijah found himself standing with Ayanna and her grandmother on the front porch of the mine office. So, what happens now? He asked. Now, Tall Grass Woman said with a smile, my granddaughter continues her work as a healer. The people of Silverbrook have learned that she's here to help, not harm. The fear has been replaced with understanding. And you? I have other places to be, other investigations to complete. This conspiracy reached many territories, and there are still people who need justice. She paused, looking at Elijah with keen eyes. But I suspect my granddaughter has found not just a community to serve, but an ally worth keeping. Elijah felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he met the old woman's gaze steadily. I'd be honored to be considered an ally. Just an ally? Ayanna asked softly, a hint of teasing in her voice despite the emotional weight of the day. Well, Elijah said, his own voice warming, I suppose that depends on whether this territory has room for a black rancher who's taken a strong interest in supporting the local healer. I think, Ayanna replied, her dark eyes bright with possibility, that this territory could very much use someone like that. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Elijah realized that he'd found something he hadn't been looking for when he rode into Silverbrook. Not just land to ranch, but a purpose worth fighting for and people worth protecting. The mine would reopen under new, safer management. The conspiracy that had killed innocent people would face justice. And in a small mountain town that had been consumed by fear and prejudice, healing would begin, not just of bodies, but of hearts and minds. Sometimes, Elijah reflected, the most important battles weren't fought with guns and armies, but with courage and compassion. Sometimes justice came not from courtrooms and laws, but from people willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of the color of their skin or the traditions they followed. And sometimes, in the midst of fighting for justice, you found something even more precious. You found home, And there you have it, the incredible true story of how one Cherokee healer and one black rancher exposed a conspiracy that reached across the American West. A story of courage in the face of hatred, of justice triumphing over greed, and of love growing in the most unexpected places. This is The Black Rancher, where we bring you the forgotten stories of America's unsung heroes. Stories like Ayanna Crow Feathers and Elijah Washington's remind us that real change happens when ordinary people find the extraordinary courage to stand up for what's right. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it made you think differently about courage and justice, then I need you to do 3 things for me. First, smash that like button and share this video with everyone you know. These stories deserve to be heard, and you can help make sure they reach the people who need to hear them most. Second, subscribe to The Black Rancher and hit that notification bell. We've got more incredible stories coming, stories of courage, of justice, of love conquering hate. Stories that will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you of the best of what America can be. And third, take this story with you into your own life. When you see injustice, when you see someone being persecuted for being different, when you see greed triumphing over human decency, remember Elijah and Ayanna. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say that's wrong and stand up for what's right. Because the truth is, their story isn't just history, it's happening right now in communities across America and around the world. And we all have a choice to make. Will we be the people who stand by and watch? Or will we be the ones who step forward and say, "Not on my watch"? Thank you for joining me for this incredible journey. Thank you for caring about these forgotten heroes. And thank you for helping me make sure their stories are never forgotten again. This is The Black Rancher. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.